Hi, this is Grouper Training for Developers and Architects. Looking at the Grouper Client, Part 3. I'm Chris Heiser from Internet 2 in University of Pennsylvania. We'll talk about an introduction to the Grouper Client. Part 1 talked about configuration and the command line. Part 2 talked about documentation for the client, debugging, using from a Java client, and using the client as a reference implementation of the web service spec. Part 3 is going to talk about the LDAP client and the XMPP message consumer. Grouper client sits outside of the core Grouper server-side components. It's a Java library that speaks the Grouper web service XML protocol, and it's also used by some of the other built-in connectors for Grouper, and also for things like communicating with another grouper to sync up groups. The Grouper client can also be used as an LDAP client. You can do this for two reasons. One, you can query grouper data in your LDAP, and two, you can do custom filters. So for instance, at Penn, we use the Grouper client as an implementation of our NetID to Person ID translator. So if you just need a simple command line way to convert someone's NetID to a Person ID, you can get credentials to contact the LDAP that does that and use the Grouper client to do that. So just like the other parts of the client, you can use the LDAP part, Java, or the command line. And it's intended for simple filters or operations. So the LDAP part is configured in the Grouper.client.properties just like everything else. And you can configure your LDAP URL, including the base DN and your login and password. And you can encrypt the password in an external file if you want, just like other config files. There are other LDAP settings in the Grouper client properties. You can look at the whole file to see what all of them are. But for instance, in that username you can put a prefix and a suffix so that the user just has to put in the UID and not have to know everything else about the LDAP structures. And you can also put aliases for certain things of the commands so that things are a little bit more intuitive for the users at your institution. So for instance, you could call your UID a NetID or a school ID or whatever you call it. So the way that your LDAP is structured at your institution is probably different than other institutions, and that's why each operation, including the Grouper operations, need to be configured in the Grouper.client.properties. So for instance, the hasMember LDAP operation, you configure where you're searching, O equals groups. You configure things that you want to match in the LDAP. So for instance, you're matching the CN of the object in OU groups with the group name, and hasMember with pen name to check, which is actually one of the items from the inputs to the command line, and then you're returning the CN, and since the result type is a Boolean, if a CN gets returned, that means that the result is true. So the output template is what's going to be printed on the screen, hasMember colon, and then whatever the result Boolean is, true or false. So this operation name is what's going to be on the command line, and then all this stuff is about how to search and what to return. So in this case, for a hasMember call on the command line, I'm just going to type java-jar grouperclient.jar -- operation equals hasMember LDAP -- and then these are the inputs. Group name equals some group name that's provisioned to LDAP dash dash pin name to check equals MC Heiser, and then has member true or false will be returned. And then you can configure get members similarly, and an example command line of that is java-jar grouper client.jar dash dash operation equals get members LDAP dash dash group name equals some group name, and that will just return all of the members with however the format is in the grouper client.properties or whatever you pass in the command line. So if you have custom LDAP operations that you want to be able to code in Java or command line easily, you might be able to use the grouper client for that. So similar to the has member and get members, you can make an operation name. You can say where to look in the LDAP, and then this is the matching attribute for in the LDAP structure, and this is what's passed in the command line. So essentially it's going to look for an object in here that has a pen name of what was passed in the command line, and this is the returning attribute, which is pen ID, and that's going to be in the expression language. So the output template is just going to say pen ID colon and whatever's returned, and the result type is a string. So basically, if I'm running from the command line, I can do java-jar grouper client.jar dash dash operation equals pen name to pen ID, which is in the config file, dash dash pen name to decode is one of the inputs, equals MC Heiser. So again, look for a pen name of MC Heiser and get the pen ID attribute and return that. So the grouper client can be used for XMPP real-time updates, and we use this at Penn in multiple places. For example, you can look on the grouper wiki at the wiki page for managing Unix commands with grouper permissions, and you need a few more jars, and once you do that you can make it work. Basically what you use this for is the grouper client is going to be used by some logic that you have, maybe in Java, and it's going to connect to the grouper web services, and it might cache information locally, and if it does that, then it's going to have better performance probably than if it's going to hit the grouper web services for every request that it needs. So instead of just periodically refreshing its cache, it can get real-time notifications from Grouper that things have changed. So in this case, the full refresh is going to be kicked off by a nightly cron, and the Grouper loader has a changelog consumer that's looking for specific changes in the Grouper registry, and when it gets them, it's going to send a message to the XMPP server at your institution where the Grouper client is listening, and that XMPP message will tell the Grouper client to execute some custom logic, and that custom logic is going to tell it to do a full refresh. So in this case it's going to refresh permissions for a certain application of who's allowed to do what in the Unix environment. Click on the quiz link in the video description to reinforce your knowledge of this topic. Thanks a lot. For further information, look at the info sheets, the mailing list, wiki, downloads, the Grouper demo server, and the other Grouper online training videos.